people like me were all sitting here after he was elected, terrified that he might sell Ukraine down the river. And that was the sort of fear going into his inauguration. But something unexpected happened.
What is the real nature of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's relationship? Trump only has nice things to say about Vladimir Putin.
Yesterday, reporters asked me if I thought President Putin was smart. I said, of course he's smart, to which I was greeted with, oh, that's such a terrible thing to say. The problem is not that Putin is smart. The real problem is that our leaders are dumb. Dumb.
Some of the various comments on Vladimir Putin from Trump's campaign. Now, it's a pertinent question as President Trump has pitched himself as something of a political deal maker, a geopolitical deal maker, if you like, the strong man who can bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Remember, that was going to happen in his first 24 hours of his administration. But since Trump's first administration, the two leaders have had an on and off again bromance, if you like. Trump's first administration, some experts feared that Trump could even be compromised by Russian intelligence. And his apparent affinity for the Russian president makes some diplomats doubt whether he'll actually force Vladimir Putin to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Or also whether he'll end up agreeing to Putin's terms at the expense of Ukraine's best interests. Well, joining us now is Sir Bill Browder, British-American financier and head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Sir Bill, thanks for giving us your time.
Great to be here.
It's a really fascinating piece by Mark Galeotti in today's Sunday Times. The relationship between the two has been, as Mark Galeotti describes, on and off. Where do you think we are now? What's the next step, do you think, from Donald Trump?
Well, I don't want to be too definitive because it's almost impossible to predict. I mean, Donald Trump goes one way and then he goes another and then he goes another after that. But why don't we just look at what we know so far and try to draw some conclusions? So, as you pointed out, there were a lot of nice things said by Trump about Putin when Trump was president. He gave Putin a pass on saying that he was a murderer. He said that he could trust Russian intelligence more than American intelligence, and various other things, which raised a lot of questions. We've also then heard going into this campaign that he was very critical of Vladimir Zelensky. We heard from some of his proxies like Elon Musk, his son, and J.D. Vance, that they wanted to cut off Ukraine. And so people like me were all sitting here after he was elected, terrified that he might sell Ukraine down the river. And that was the sort of fear going into his inauguration. But something unexpected happened. And I don't want to read too much into it because everything that I'm about to tell you was sort of mumblings or murmurings in very broad-ranging conversations, but this is all we have to go on. And the first murmuring was in a conversation. He said that when they're talking about ending the war, he said, I think that Vladimir Zelensky is ready to negotiate. And then he said that the war has been terrible, lots of deaths and destruction on both sides. He said that Putin's economy is going very badly. And then he said the most interesting thing, which was that he wasn't sure whether Putin would negotiate or not. So he's now saying Zelensky would, Putin wouldn't. So that was the first thing. Then the second thing, which was dramatically more definitive, was a tweet that he put out, or I should say a Truth Social posting, because I think that's where he puts his information, where he then said that if Putin didn't negotiate, that he would impose tariffs, taxes, and sanctions on Russia, which was very much not in the same tone as all that bromance stuff that we saw when Trump was previously president. And then the third thing, and I think this is very significant, is he said he's going to now start leaning on the Saudis and others to push the oil price down, because if the oil price was down, Russia wouldn't be able to afford the war. And this all sounds like, for people like me, pretty good things to hear. It means that he hasn't abandoned Ukraine, that he's, if anything, the onus is on Putin, and that he's going to put pressure on Putin. Now, I don't think we should be drawing too much from this because anything could happen. But at least in the first couple of days after he's been inaugurated, it looks like Ukraine is going to be is still standing in our minds and in potentially in the mind of Donald Trump.
I mean, he was also asked shortly after his inauguration about Vladimir Putin. He said he's not doing so well, suggesting the war was not making him look very good in Trump's own words, and he was destroying Russia. How do you think those comments would have gone down in the Kremlin?
Not well, definitely not well. And I would argue that's, I guess, humiliating for Putin to have the most powerful man in the free world, Donald Trump, saying those types of things. What's interesting is Putin's response, because Putin, he really doesn't like being humiliated. He's he sees himself as a strong man, an alpha male, someone who really doesn't get pushed around. And all of a sudden, he's getting pushed around. He's being slandered in his mind by Donald Trump, and he's being pressured by Donald Trump. And that's not something he normally allows to happen. But instead of responding negatively, he ignored it. He completely ignored it. And he made a very unusual statement, which was that basically saying that he thinks Donald Trump is a very smart man, a very powerful man. And most interestingly, he said, and he thinks, Vladimir Putin thinks, that the 2000 U.S. presidential election was stolen from Donald Trump. Yeah. Something that Donald Trump, of course, very much thinks himself. And so here you have, this alpha male on steroids, Vladimir Putin, becoming a beta male, basically ignoring the ultimatum and coming up with some, kind of flattery for Donald Trump. Now, will it work? Will it not work? What does it mean? Nobody knows. But it's interesting to see sort of Vladimir Putin subordinating himself under Donald Trump.
Yeah, he said on Russian state TV, Vladimir Putin said if his victory hadn't been stolen in 2020, then maybe there would not have been the crisis in Ukraine that emerged in 2022. So, Bill, let's look at some comments from the now confirmed Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. He said in his Senate confirmation hearing, regards the Ukraine war, he said, "We know who the aggressor is. We know who the good guy is." What role do you think is going to be played by people like Pete Hegseth, who's very close to President Trump?
Well, the answer is that Trump is going to call all the shots. That's how it works in this particular administration. Pete Hegseth will do what he's told. Same thing with the Secretary of State. Same thing with the National Security Advisor. Having said that, each one of these individuals so far has been talking a tough line on Putin and talking a supportive line on Ukraine. And I was most pleased by the comments that came from the Donald Trump's special presidential envoy for Ukraine. This is General Kellogg, who basically said, they repeated Trump's point that he wants the war to end, he wants Putin to negotiate, and the best way to make that happen is to lower oil prices. And so there seems to be, I don't know if it's by design or these people are just sort of looking for cues, but there seems to be a consistency in the talking points among the underlings of Trump that Ukraine should be supported and Putin should be pressured. And so, first weekend that it gives me some comfort. I say very strongly the first weekend, because this stuff changes so quick and so radically that we cannot make it. I don't think we can take that to the bank. We just have to hope that it carries on into the second week and the third week and so on.
And so, Bill, finally, before we go, I mean, a lot of focus, quite rightly, is on Donald Trump and how he's going to deal with both Zelensky and Putin. But are we ignoring one of the big players in this conversation, which is China and to a certain degree India? I mean, Russia has managed to withstand all the sanctions that have been thrown their way because of the support that they're able to get from China and India, being able to export the gas and the oil to other countries that will buy it and therefore keep the economy going. So, I mean, is it all in Donald Trump's hands, or is China going to have to go along with whatever Donald Trump comes up with as a solution?
Well, I think it really is in Donald Trump's hands. If Donald Trump says to China, if you continue to process Russian oil, we're going to impose sanctions on your oil refineries. China would drop that idea very quickly. China's economy is not doing well. The last thing they need is trouble with America. The last thing they need is tariffs or to provoke tariffs. They're trying to do everything they can to avoid tariffs. And so I think Donald Trump really does hold the keys to this situation. And if he does the right thing, it could be a good outcome, not a bad outcome. But again, I caution everybody not to draw too many conclusions from the first few days of his presidency. There's a lot more stuff that has to happen before we can be thinking that we're in the clear.
A lot of ifs, of course, in my next question. But if we see, as we have seen, the ceasefire in Gaza and Israel continue and a permanent solution found, and if we see an end to the Ukraine-Russia war, do you think that Donald Trump can achieve his secret ambition, which is a Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, there's a lot of ifs, and I think the second if is really the important if. I don't think there's going to be any. I don't think that Putin is going to back down from this war. Putin is in this war for one simple reason, which is to stay in power. He needed a war so that people weren't mad at him; they were mad at Ukrainians, and he's not just going to say, "Oh, okay, never mind." After losing nearly 1 million men and $1 trillion, he's not going to say never mind. He's going to carry on doing what he needs to do because this war is about him staying in power in Russia. It's not about anyone telling him what to do. And so, sadly, I think that this war is going to carry on. But hopefully, this war carries on with the full support of the Americans, Europeans, the Brits, and everybody else, so that Ukraine has the best possible chance of protecting itself and defeating Russia in the end.
So, Bill Browder, as ever, thank you for giving us your time.